In the early 20th century, America was at a crossroads between progress and morality, a country wrestling with its conscience and its vices. Alcohol had long been a central part of social life in the United States, found in taverns, homes, and celebrations across every class and region. Yet behind the laughter and clinking glasses was a growing movement that saw liquor not as a luxury, but as a poison destroying families, productivity, and the moral fiber of the nation. This tension would ignite one of the most ambitious and controversial social experiments in American history, the Prohibition era. Long before Prohibition officially began in 1920, the seeds of temperance were sown by religious and social reformers who believed alcohol was the root of countless social ills. The movement had deep roots in 19th century America, championed by organizations such as the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League. These groups argued that alcohol led to domestic abuse, crime, and poverty, and they gained enormous political power by framing temperance as a fight for family, faith, and national strength. For many Americans, particularly in rural and Protestant communities, banning alcohol wasn't just moral, it was patriotic. The momentum grew through the late 1800s and early 1900s, especially as waves of immigration brought new drinking cultures that clashed with old American values. Saloons became symbols of corruption, where men wasted paychecks and politicians bought influence. By the time World War I erupted in 1914, the temperance cause found new allies. Grain, reformers argued, should be used for food, not alcohol. Soldiers needed sober strength, not drunken weakness. The war became a moral catalyst, pushing the idea that true American loyalty required sacrifice, and one of those sacrifices was liquor. In 1919, the movement reached its triumphant peak when Congress passed the 18th Amendment, officially banning the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors. The Volstead Act soon followed, defining what intoxicating meant and outlining the rules for enforcement. On January 17, 1920, Prohibition became the law of the land, and America went dry, or at least, that was the plan. The promise was a sober, safer nation free from the influence of alcohol. What followed instead was a nation that discovered its thirst could not be legislated away. Almost overnight, the country split between dries who supported the ban and waites who resisted it. Liquor didn't vanish, it simply went underground. Speakeasies, the secret bars of the Prohibition era, appeared in every city and town, often hidden behind false walls, coded passwords, or unmarked doors. These illicit establishments became cultural hubs where men and women drank, danced, and defied the law together. Ironically, Prohibition gave rise to a new kind of American nightlife, one that celebrated rebellion and glamour. As the black market for alcohol exploded, organized crime flourished like never before. Figures such as Al Capone in Chicago and Lucky Luciano in New York built vast criminal empires on bootleg liquor, smuggling whiskey, gin, and rum across borders and producing bathtub gin in basements. Gang wars over territory became commonplace, and violence spilled into the streets. Murders, bombings, and corruption within law enforcement skyrocketed. The noble experiment that aimed to eliminate crime had, instead, created a new kind of underworld economy that thrived on it. Meanwhile, the government struggled to enforce the law. With limited funding and manpower, federal agents faced a losing battle. The Prohibition Bureau was riddled with corruption, and many agents were bribed to look the other way. The sheer scale of defiance was overwhelming. Americans continued drinking in secret, brewing beer in their kitchens and distilling moonshine in the countryside. By the mid-1920s, it was clear that enforcement was failing. The law had turned ordinary citizens into lawbreakers, and respect for authority began to erode. Despite its problems, some Americans still believed Prohibition was worth saving. Women's groups, church leaders, and conservative politicians argued that society needed more discipline, not less. They saw crime and corruption as proof of moral decay, not the failure of the law itself. Yet, As the 1920s roared on, the cultural landscape shifted dramatically. Jazz music, flapper fashion, and the spirit of rebellion defined the decade, and alcohol was at the heart of it all. Drinking had become not only an act of pleasure, but an act of defiance. The Great Depression struck in 1929, and with it came economic desperation. Millions were unemployed, and the government was desperate for new sources of revenue. Many began to question the logic of a policy that banned one of the most heavily taxed industries in American history. Repealing Prohibition, they argued, could create jobs, revive the economy, and restore much-needed tax income. Public sentiment shifted, and politicians began to listen. The same government that once fought so hard to enforce the 18th Amendment now prepared to undo it. In 1933, after 13 tumultuous years, the 21st Amendment was ratified, repealing the 18th Amendment and officially ending Prohibition. It remains the only time in American history that a constitutional amendment has been entirely reversed. Across the country, celebrations erupted. Bars reopened, breweries restarted production, and Americans toasted to the return of legal drinking. Yet the end of Prohibition left behind a complex legacy that still shapes the nation today. The experiment had unintended but lasting consequences. Organized crime had become entrenched in American cities. Law enforcement credibility had suffered, and public trust in government regulation had been damaged. At the same time, the era changed how Americans viewed personal freedom, government power, and morality in public life. It also laid the foundation for modern alcohol laws, including age restrictions, licensing, and federal taxation. In many ways, Prohibition didn't kill the American drinking culture. It reinvented it. The lessons of Prohibition reach beyond history. It showed that legislating morality on a massive scale is fraught with complications. While its supporters believed they were saving the soul of the nation, the results revealed the limits of government in controlling private behavior. It also exposed the deep cultural divides that still exist between urban and rural America, between personal liberty and social order. Prohibition was not just about alcohol, it was about identity, power, and the struggle to define what kind of nation the United States wanted to be. The echoes of that struggle remain. Modern debates over drugs, gambling, and personal freedom still reflect the same questions asked a century ago. Should government dictate morality, or should individuals decide for themselves? History suggests that when a law runs too far ahead of public opinion, it is destined to fail. The story of Prohibition is not simply a tale of crime and cocktails. It's a story about America's constant balancing act between freedom and control. Today, historians look back at Prohibition not as a total failure, but as a revealing chapter in the American experiment. It was a time when moral conviction met human nature head-on, and both sides refused to back down. It changed politics, culture, and law enforcement, and left behind an indelible mark on the nation's conscience. The speakeasies may be gone, but their legacy endures in every toast raised, every regulation written, and every lesson learned from those dry years that tried and failed to change human desire. If you enjoyed learning about this fascinating and turbulent period in American history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting us know what other historical topics you'd like us to explore next. Your support helps us keep history alive and bring the past to life, one story at a time.